Part 8 of Childe Christopher and Goldilind the Fair by William Morris. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 28 of the Hosting in Hazeldale. On the morrow early was Jack of the Toffs dight for departure, with Christopher and David and Gilbert and 50 of his best men. But when they went out of the porch into the sweet morning, lo! there was Goldilind before them, clad in her green gown, and as fresh and dear as the early day itself. And Jack looked on her and said, "And thou, my lady and queen, thou art dight as thou wouldst wend with us."
"Yea," she said, "and why not?"
"What sayest thou, King Christopher?" said the captain.
"Nay," said King Christopher, reddening, "it is for thee to yea say or nay say, though true it is that I have bidden her farewell for 2 days' space."
And the two stood looking on one another.
But Jack laughed and said,
"Well then, so be it, but let us get to the way, or else when the sweethearts of these lads know that we have a woman with us, we shall have them all at our backs."
Thereat all laughed who were within earshot, and were merry. So they wended the woodland ways, some afoot, some a horseback, of whom was Jack of the Toffs. But Christopher and David went afoot, and Goldilind rode a fair white horse which the captain had gotten her. As they went, and King Christopher ever by Goldilind's right hand, and were merry and joyous, they two were alone in the woodland way. So Christopher took her hand and kissed it, and said, "Sweetling, why didst thou tell me naught of thy will to come along with us? Never had I baulked thee." She looked at him, blushing as a rose, and said, "Dear friend, I will tell thee. I knew that thou wouldst make our parting piteous sweet this morning, and of that I would not be baulked. See then how rich I am, since I have both parted from thee and have thee." And therewith she louted down from her saddle, and they kissed together sweetly, and so thereafter wore the way. So came they to the plain of Hazeldale, which was a wide valley with a middling river winding about it, the wildwood at its back toward the Toffs, and in front downland, naught wooded, save here and there a tree nigh a homestead or cot, for that way the land was builded for a space. Forsooth it was not easy for the folk thereabouts to live quietly, but if they were friends in somewise to Jack of the Toffs. So when the company of the Toffs came out into the dale about 3 hours after noon, it was no wonder to them to see men riding and going to and fro, and folk pitching tents and raising booths nigh to the cover of the wood. And when the coming of the Toft folk was seen, and the winding of their horns heard, there was many a glad cry raised in answer, and many an horn blown, and all the men there came running together toward where now was stayed Jack of the Toffs and Christopher and their men. Then Goldilind bade Christopher help her light down, so he took her in his arms, and was not over hasty in setting her down again. But when she stood by him, she looked over the sunny field, darkened by the folk hastening over the greensward, and her eyes glittered, and her cheek flushed, and she said, "Lord King, be these some others of thy men?" "Yea, sweetling," said he, "to live and die with me." She looked on him and said softly, "Maybe it were an ill wish to wish that I were thou. Yet if it might be for 1 hour." Said he, "Shall it not be for more than 1 hour? Shall it not be for evermore, since we twain are become one?" "Nay," she said, "this is but a word. I am but thine handmaid, and now I can scarce refrain my body from falling before thy feet." He laughed in her face for joy, and said, "Abide a while until these men have looked on thee, and then shalt thou see how thou wilt be a flame of war in their hearts that none shall withstand." Now were the dale dwellers all come together in their weapons, and they were glad of their king and his loveling, and stout men were they all, albeit some were old, and some scarce of man's age. So they were ranked and told over, and the tale of them was over 60 who had obeyed the war arrow, and more they said would come in every hour. But now the captains of them bade the Toft folk eat with them, and they yea said the bidding merrily, and word was given, and sacks and baskets brought forth, and barrels to boot, and all men sat down on the greensward,
and high was the feast, and much the merriment on the edge of Hazeldale. Chapter 29. Tidings come to Hazeldale. But they had not done their meat, and had scarce begun upon their drink, ere they saw 3 men come riding on the spur over the crown of the bent before them. These made no stay for aught, but rode straight through the ford of the river, as men who knew well where it was, and came on hastily toward the feasters by the wood edge. Then would some have run to meet them, but Jack of the Toffs bade them abide till he had heard the tidings, whereas they needed not to run to their weapons, for all of them they were fully dight for war, save it might be the doing on of their sallets or basnets. But Jack and Christopher alone went forward to meet those men, and the foremost of them cried out at once, "I know thee, Jack of the Toffs, I know thee. Up an arm, for the foemen are upon thee, and so choose thee whether thou wilt fight or flee." Quoth Jack, laughing, "I know thee also, Wat of White End, and when thou hast told me how many and who be the foemen, we will look either to fighting or fleeing." Said Wat, "Thou knowest the blazon of the banner which we saw, 3 red wolves running on a silver field?" "Yea, forsooth," said Jack. "'Tis the Baron of Brimside that beareth that shield ever, and now the Baron hight the Lord Gandalf. How many was he?" Said Wat, 10 hundreds or more, but what say, fellows?" Quoth the other twain, More there were." Said Jack of the Toffs, "And when shall he be here, deem ye?" "In less than an hour," said Wat. "He will be on thee with great and small, but his riders, some of them in lesser space." Then turned Jack about and cried out for David, and when he came he said, "Put thy long legs over a good horse, and ride straight back to the Toffs, and gather whatever may bear spear and draw bow, and hither with them, lad, by the nighest road. Tarry not, speak no word, begone." So David turned, and was presently riding swiftly back through the woodland paths. But Jack spake to the bearers of tidings, "Good fellows, go ye yonder and bid them give you a morsel and a cup, and tell all the tidings, and this withal, that we have naught to flee from a good fight-stead for Gandalf of Brimside." Therewith he turned to Christopher and said, "Thy pardon, King, but these matters must be seen to straightway. Now do thou help me array our folk, for there is heart enough in them as thee and me, and mayhappen we may make an end to this matter now and here. Moreover, the Baron of Brimside is a stout carle, so fight we must, meseemeth." Then he called to them one of the captains of the Toffs, and they 3 spake together heedfully a little, and thereafter they fell to work arraying the folk, and King Christopher did his part therein deftly and swiftly, for quick of wit he was, and that the more so when so anything was to be done. As to the array, the main of the folk that were spearmen and billmen but moved forward somewhat from where they had dined to the hanging of the bent, so that their foemen would have the hill against them, or ever they came on point and edge. But the bowmen, of whom were now some 200s, for many men had come in after the first tally, were spread abroad on the left hand of the spearmen toward the river, where the ground was somewhat broken and bushed with thorn bushes. And a bight of the water drew nearer to the tofters, amidst of which was a flat eyot, edged with willows and covered with firm and sound greensward, and was some 30 yards end long and 20 over thwart. So there they abode the coming of the foe, and it was now hard on 5 o'clock. But Christopher went up to Goldilind, where she stood amidst of the spearmen, hand turning over hand, and her feet wandering to and fro almost without her will. And when he came to her, she had much ado to refrain her from falling on his bosom and weeping there. But he cried to her gaily, "Now, my lady and queen, thou shalt see a fair play toward even sooner than we looked for. And thine eyes shall follow me, if the battle be thronged, by this token, that amongst all these good men and true, I only wear a 4-gilded basnet with a crown about it." "Oh," she said, "if it were but over, and thou alive and free, I would pay for that, I deem, if I might, by a sojourn in Green Harbour again." "What," he said,
that I might have to thrust myself into the peril of snatching thee forth again?" And he laughed merrily. "Nay," said he, "this play must needs begin before it endeth, and by St. Nicholas, I deem that to-day it beginneth well." And she put her hands before her face, and her shoulders were shaken with sobs. "Alas, sweetling," said he, "that my joy should be thy sorrow. But, I pray thee, take not these stout hearts for runaways. And, oh, look, look!" She looked up wondering and timorous, but all about her the men sprang up and shouted, and tossed up bill and sword, and the echo of their cries came back from the bowman on the left, and Christopher's sword came rattling out of the scabbard and went gleaming up aloft. Then words came into the cry of the folk, and Goldilind heard it, that they cried, "Child Christopher! King Christopher!" Then over her head came a sound of flapping and rending, as the evening wind beat about the face of the wood, and she heard folk cry about her, "The banner! The banner! Ho, for the woodwife of Oakenrealm!" Then her eyes cleared for what was aloof above her, and she saw a dark mass come spreading down over the bent on the other side of the river, and the glittering points and broad gleams of white light amidst of it, and noise came from it, and she knew that here were come the foemen. But she thought to herself that they looked not so many after all, and she looked at the great and deft bodies of their folk, and their big-headed spears and wide-bladed glaives and bills, and strove with her heart and refrained her fear, and thrust back the image which had arisen before her of Green Harbour come back again, and she lonely and naked in the least guard-chamber. And she stood firm, and waved her hand to greet the folk, and lo, there was Christopher kneeling before her and kissing her hand, and great shouts arising about her of "The Lady of Oakenrealm! The Lady of Medem! For the Lady! For the Lady!" Chapter 30 of the Field that was set in the Holm of Hazeldale. Now thither cometh Jack of the Toffs, and spake to Christopher. "See thou, lad, Lord King I should say, this looketh not like very present battle, for they be stayed half-way down the bent, and lo thou, some half-score are coming forth from the throng with a white shield raised aloft. Do we in likewise, for they would talk with us." "Shall we trust them, father?" said Christopher. "Trust them we may, son," said Jack. "Gandalf is a violent man, and a lifter of other men's goods, but I deem not so evil of him as that he would be wraith troth." So then they let do a white cloth over a shield, and hoist it on a long spear, and straightway they gat to horse, Jack of the Toffs, and Christopher, and Howard of Whiteacre, and Gilbert, and a half-score all told, and they rode straight down to the ford, which was just below the tail of the Eot aforesaid, and as they went they saw the going of the others, who were by now hard on the water-side. And said Jack, "See now, King Christopher, he who rides first in a surcoat of his arms is even the Baron, the black bullet-headed one, and the next to him, the red-head, is his squire and man, Oliver Marson, a stout man, but fierce and grim-hearted. Lo thou, they are taking the water, but they are making for the Eot and not our shore. Son mine, this will mean a hazelled field in the long run, but now they will look for us to come to them therein. Yea, now they are aland and have pitched their white shield, and hearken, that is their horn. Blow we an answer. Ho, noise, set thy lips to the brass." So then, when one horn had done its song, the other took it up, and men of both hosts knew well that the horns blew but for truce and parley. Now come the Toft folk to the ford and take the water, which was very shallow on their side, and when they come up unto the Eot, they find the Baron and his folk off their horses and lying on the green grass. So they also lighted down and stood and hailed the newcomers. Then uprose the Lord Gandalf and greeted the Toft folk, and said, "Jack of the Toffs, thou ridest many man to-day." "Yea, lord," said Jack, "and thou also. What is thine errand?" "Nay," said the Baron, "what is thine? As for mine host here, there came a bird to Brimside and did me to wit that I should be like to need a throng if I came thy way. and sooth was that. Come now, tell us what is toward, thou rank reiver, though I have an inkling thereof. For if this were a mere lifting, thou wouldst not sit still here amidst thy friends of Hazeldale. Lord, said Jack of the Toffs, thou shalt hear mine errand, and then give heed to what thou wilt do. Look to the bent under the wood, and tell me, dost thou see the blazon of the banner under which be my men? That I cannot, said the Lord Gandalf, but I have seen the banner of Oakenrealm, which beareth the woodwoman with loins garlanded with oak leaves. Look much like to it at such a distance. Said Jack, it is not ill guessed. Yonder banner is the king's banner, and beareth on it the woman of Oakenrealm. The Lord bent his brows on him and said, Forsooth, rank reiver, I wotted not that thou hadst King Rolf for thy guest. Quoth Jack of the Toffs, Forsooth, Lord, no such guest as the Earl Marshal Rolf would I have alive in my poor house. Well, Jack, said the big lord, grinning, read me the riddle, and then we shall see what is to be done, as thou sayest. Lord, said Jack, dost thou see this young man standing by me? Yea, said the other, he's big enough that I may see him better than thy banner. If he but make old bones, as is scarce like, since he is of thy flock, he shall one day make a pretty man. He's a gay rider now. What else is he? Quoth Jack of the Tofts, He is my king, and thy king, and the all folks' king, and the king of Oakenrealm. And now, hearken mine errand. It is to make all folk name him king. Said the Lord, This minstrel's tale goes with the song the birds sang to me this morning, and therefore am I here thronging, to win thy head, rank reiver, and this young man's head, since it may not better be, and let the others go free for this time. Ah, what sayest thou? And thou, youngling, 'tis but the stroke of a sword since thou wast fallen into my hands, and not into the hangman's of the king's. Thou must win them first, lord, said Jack of the Toffs. Therefore what sayest thou? Where shall we cast down the white shield and uprear the red? What art thou, head, heart, and hand, rank reiver? Said the lord. Bide a while. So he sat silent a little. Then he said, Thou seest, Jack of the Toffs, that now thou hast thrust the torch into the tow, if I go back to King Rolf without the heads of you twain, I'm like to pay for it with mine own. Therefore hearken. If we buckle together in fight presently, it is most like that I shall come to my above. But thou art so wily and stout, that it is not unlike that thou, and perchance this luckless youngling, may slip through my fingers into the wood, and then it will avail me little with the king that I have slain a few score nameless wolf-heads. So look you, here is a fair field hazelled by God. Let us two use it to-day, and fight to the death here, and then, if thou win me, smite off my head, and let my men fight it out afterwards as best they may without me. And 'tis like they will be beaten then. But if I win thee, then I win this youngling withal, and bear back both heads to my lord king, after I've scattered thy wolf-heads and slain as many as I will, which shall surely befall if thou be slain first. Then cried out Jack of the Toffs, Hail to thy word, stout heart! This is well offered, and I take it for myself and my lord king here. And all that stood by and heard gave a glad sound with their voices, and their armour rattled and rang as man turned to man to praise their captains. But now spake Christopher, Lord of Brimside, it is naught wondrous that thou set me aside as of no account, whereas thou deemest me no king or king's kindred. But thou, Lord Earl, who wert once Jack of the Toffs, I marvel at thee, that thou hast forgotten thy king so soon. Ye twain shall now wot that this is my quarrel, and that none but I shall take this battle upon him. Thou, servant of Rolf, the traitor and murderer, hearken. I say that I am king of Oakenrealm, and the very son of King Christopher the Old, and that will I maintain with my body against every gainsayer. Thou, Lord of Brimside, wilt thou gainsay it? Then I say thou liest, and lo here my glove. And he cast it down before the Lord. Again was there good rumour, and that from either side of the bystanders. But Jack of the Toffs stood up silent and stiff, and the Baron of Brimside laughed and said, Well, swain, if thou art weary of life, so let it be. As for me, But how sayest thou, Jack of the Toffs? Art thou content to give thine head away in this fashion, whereas thou wottest that I shall presently slay this king of thine? Said Jack, The king of Oakenrealm must rule me as well as others of his liegemen. He must fight if he will, and be slain if he will. Then suddenly he fell a-laughing, and beat his hand on his thigh, till the armour rattled again, and then he cried out, Lord Gandalf, have a care, I bid thee. Where wilt thou please to be buried, lord? Said the other, I wot not what thou wilt mean by thy fooling, rank reiver, but here I take up this youngling's glove, and on his head be his fate. Now, as to this battle, my will is that we two champions be all alone and afoot on the eyot. How say ye? Even so be it, said Jack, but I say that 50 on each side shall be standing on their own bank to see the play, and the rest of the host come no nigher than now we are. I yea say it, said the Baron, and now do thou, rank reiver, go back to thy fellowship and tell them what we have areeded, and do thou, Oliver Marson, do so much for our folk, and bid them what this, that if any of them break the troth, he shall lose naught more than his life for that same. Therewith all went ashore to either bank, save the Baron of Brimside and Christopher, and the Baron laid him down on the ground and fell to whistling the tune of a merry Yule dance. But as for Christopher, he looked on his foeman and deemed he had seldom seen so big and stalwart a man, and withal he was of ripe age and had seen some 40 winters. Then he also cast himself down on the grass and fell into a kind of dream, as he watched a pair of wagtails that came chirping up from the sandy spits below the eyot, till suddenly great shouting broke out, first from his own bent, and then from the foemen's, and Christopher knew that the folk on either side had just heard of the battle that was to be on the holm. The Baron arose at the sound and looked to his own men, whence were now coming that 50 who were to look on the battle from the bank. But Christopher stirred not, but lay quietly amongst the flowers of the grass, till he heard the splash of horse hoofs in the ford, and there presently was come Jack of the Toffs, bearing basnet and shield for his lord. And he got off his horse and spake to Christopher, If I may not fight for thee, my son and king, yet at least it is the right of thine earl to play the squire to thee. But a word before thy basnet is over thine ears. The man yonder is well nigh a giant for stature and strength, yet I think thou mayest deal with him, and be none the sorer when thou liest down tonight. To be short, this is it. When thou hast got a stroke in upon him, and he falters, then give him no time, but fly at him in thy wild-cat manner, and show what like thews thou hast under thy smooth skin. Now thine helm, lad, so art thou dight, and something tells me thou shalt do it off in victory. Chapter 31. The Battle on the Holm. So when Christopher was armed, Jack turned about speedily, and so gat him back through the ford, and stood there on the bank with the 9 other folk of the Tofts. And by this time was Gandalf of Brimside armed also, and Oliver Marson, who had done his helm on him, was gone to his side of the river. Drew the huge man-at-arms then toward Christopher, but his sword was yet in the sheath. Christopher set his point to the earth and abode him, and the Baron spake, Lad, thou art fair and bold both as I can see it, and Jack of the Toffs is so much an old foe of mine that he is well nigh a friend. So what sayest thou? If thou wilt yield thee straightway, I will have both thine head and the outlaws with me to King Rolf, but yet on your shoulders and ye two alive. Haps will go as haps will, and it may be that ye shall both live for another battle, and grow wiser, and may happen abide in the wood with the Reivers men. Ha! What sayest thou? Christopher laughed and said, Wouldst thou pardon one who is not yet doomed, Baron? And yet thy word is pleasant to us, for we see that if we win thee, thou shalt be a good liegeman of us. Now, Baron, sword in fist. Gandalf drew his sword, muttering, Aha! He's lordly and kingly enough, yet may this learn him a lesson. Indeed, the blade was huge and brown and ancient, and sword and man had looked a very terror save to one great-hearted. But Christopher said, What sayest thou now, Baron? Shall we cast down our shields to earth, for why should we chop into wood and leather?" The Baron cast down his shield and said, "Bold are thy words, lad. If thy deeds go with them, it may be better for thee than for me. Now keep thee." And therewith he leapt forward and swept his huge sword around. But Christopher swerved speedily and enough, so that the blade touched him not, and the huge man had overreached himself, and ere he had his sword well under sway again, Christopher had smitten him so sharply on the shoulder that the mails were sundered, and the blood ran, and withal the Baron staggered with the mere weight of the stroke. Then Christopher saw his time, and leapt aloft and dealt such a stroke on the side of his head that the Baron tottered yet more. But now was he taught by those two terrible strokes, and he gathered all his heart to him, and all the might of his thews, and leapt aback and mastered his sword, and came on fierce but wary, shouting out for Brimside and the King. Christopher cried never a cry, but swung his sword well within his sway, and the stroke came on Gandalf's forearm, and brake the mails and wounded him. And then, as the Baron rushed forward, the wary lad gat his blade under his foeman's nigh the hilts, and he gave it a wise twist, and forth flew the ancient iron away from its master. Gandalf seemed to heed not that he was swordless, but gave out a great roar, and rushed at Christopher to close with him, and the well-knit lad gave back before him, and turned from side to side, and kept the sword-point before Gandalf's eyes ever, till suddenly, as the Baron was running his fiercest, he made a mighty sweep at his right leg, since he had no more to fear his sword, and the edge fell so strong and true, but for the byrnie-hose he had smitten the limb asunder, and even as it was, it made him a grievous wound, so that the Lord of Brimside fell clattering to the earth, and Christopher bestrode him and cried, "How sayest thou, champion? Is it enough?" "Yea, enough, and maybe more," said the Baron. "Wilt thou smite off mine head, or what wilt thou?" Said Christopher, "Here hath been enough smiting, meseemeth, save thy lads and ours have a mind to buckle to. And lo thou, men are running down from the bents towards us from both sides, yet not in any warlike manner as yet. Now, Baron, here cometh thy grim squire that I heard called Oliver, and if thou wilt keep the troth, thou shalt bid him order thy men so that they fall not upon us till the battle be duly pitched. Then shalt thou be borne home, since thou canst not go with no hindrance from us." Now was Oliver come indeed, and the other 9 with him, and on the other side was come Jack of the Toffs and 4 others. Then spake the Baron of Brimside, "I may do better than thou biddest me, for now I verily trow herein that thou art the son of Christopher the Old, so valiant as thou art, and so sad a smiter, and withal that thou fearest not to let thy foeman live. So hearken all ye, and thou specially, Oliver Marson, my captain. I am now become the man of my Lord King Christopher, and will follow him whereso he will, and I deem that will presently be to Oakenham and the King's seat there. Now look to it that thou, Oliver, order my men under King Christopher's banner till I be healed, and then, if all be not over, I shall come forth myself, shield on neck and spear in fist, to do battle for my liege lord. So help me God and St. James of the Water." Therewith speech failed him, and his wit therewith. So betwixt them they unarmed him, and did him what leechdom they might do there and then, and he was no wise hurt deadly. As for child Christopher, he had no scratch of steel on him, and Oliver knelt before him when he had dight his own lord, and swore fealty to him then and there, and so departed to order the folk of Brimside, and tell them the tidings, and swear them liegemen of King Christopher. Chapter 32 of Goldilind and Christopher. Now Jack of the Toffs said a word to one of his men, and he rode straightway up into the field under the wood, and spake to 3 of the captains of the folk, and they ranked 100 of the men of those who were best dight, and upraised among them the banner of Oakenrealm, and led all them down to the river bank. And with these must needs go Goldilind, and when they came down thither, Christopher and Jack were there on the bank to hail them, and they raised a great shout when they saw their king and their earl standing there, and the shout was given back from the woodside.
And then the men of Brimside took it up, for they had heard the bidding of their lord, and he was now in a pavilion which they had raised for him on the mead, and the leeches were looking to his hurts. And they feared him, but rather loved than hated him, and he was more to them than the king in Oakenrealm, and they were all ready to do his will. But as to Goldilind, her mind it had been, as she was going down the meadow, that she would throw herself upon Christopher's bosom and love him with glad tears of love. But as she came and stood over against him, she was abashed, and stood still looking on him, and spake no word. And he also was ashamed before all that folk to say the words whereof his heart was full, and longed for the night, that they might be alone together. But at last he said, Lady and Queen, thou seest that we be well beloved, that they rejoice so much in a little deed of mine. And still she spake naught, and held hand in hand. But Jack of the Toft spake and said, By St. Hubert, the deed may be little, though there may be men who would think no little of overcoming the biggest men and the fellest fighter of Oakenrealm. But at least great things shall come thereof. King, thy strokes of this day have won thee Oakenrealm, or no man I know in field, and many a mother's son have they saved from death. For look thou yonder over the river, Goldilind, my lady, and tell me what thou seest. She turned to him and said, Lord Earl, I see warriors a many. Yea, said Jack, and stout fellows be they for the more part, and hard had been the hand-play had we met ere they had turned their backs. But now, see thou, we shall wend side by side toward Oakenrealm, for our lord there hath won them to his friends, and doubt thou not that when they see him and thee and I, they shall be friends indeed. What, dost thou weep for this, or is it because he hath done the deed and not thou, or rather because thine heart is full for the love of him? She smiled kindly on Jack, but even therewith she felt 2 hands laid on her shoulders, and Christopher kissed her without any word. End of Part 8.